In today's deep dive, we're doing an economic gut check. Where's the economy headed in 2014? One of the most powerful financial advisors of our time says we need to rethink some of our basic beliefs if we want a real economic forecast. My next guest, Alan Greenspan, says he got it wrong. The man nicknamed the Maestro admits a flawed philosophy may have contributed to the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression.
Not since the Great Depression has the federal government stepped in to help a failing financial institution in this country the way they did over this past weekend, brokering a deal for J.P. Morgan Chase to step in and take over Bear Stearns.
In the months after the collapse of Bear Stearns in 2008, we watched huge financial institutions, from AIG and Washington Mutual, that simply fell apart. The man who'd been a high-level financial advisor since the Nixon and Ford administrations and then served as Federal Reserve Chairman before the collapse was suddenly admitting to a House Oversight Committee that he'd been working on a mistaken assumption for decades.
You found that your view of the world, your ideology was not right. It was not working.
Precisely. No, that's precisely the reason I was shocked, because I had been going for 40 years or more with very considerable evidence that it was working exceptionally well.
After spending most of his life studying the intricacies of Wall Street and the complexities of the global economy, Alan Greenspan has spent the years since the 2008 financial collapse trying to figure out exactly where things were miscalculated. Today, Dr. Greenspan joins me now with some of these answers in his new book, The Map and the Territory: Risk, Human Nature, and the Future of Forecasting. So the goal of this book was try to figure out, how can we find a better economic forecast, because you believe the models you dealt with and your successors dealt with were just flawed?
Most everybody else dealt with.
Right, everybody in the community.
What went wrong was there is a fundamental assumption in all of what we call classical economics, the things that everybody's been dealing with over the years, in that we presumed that the degree to which people act irrationally, and everybody admits they do that at quite a great deal of time, was random, meaning it didn't matter. It washed out, and it only was rational thinking.
You didn't believe that irrational economic behavior was something you could forecast. Is that the fair way of looking at it?
Well, in fact, that's the conclusion I came to as a consequence of the assumption, which every major forecaster implicitly had that assumption. What this book endeavors to do is to demonstrate that that premise is wrong. That is, irrational behavior, emotional behavior, is systematic. Fear is an extremely dominant force, far more than euphoria and greed. And when you calculate the implicit numbers underlying those changes, along with, they have a whole series of additional sort of what I call human propensities or inbred propensities, which govern human behavior, and essentially is covered in the new form of economics, which is called behavioral economics. It's a special science which essentially says that the presumption that human beings are acting fully rationally in their own self-interest is false. And that is basically what I've tried to do, is to marry the two different forms of economics.
Well, it seems as if, for instance, one of the things that this administration got wrong in some of their fixes was assuming consumer confidence. Everything was always banked, whether there was a stimulus and the different things, that consumer confidence, the consumers would act in a way to jumpstart the economy, that if you gave them more money, they would spend it. And they, for instance, in 2009, they totally missed the idea that, hey, guess what? Consumers were actually going to act more conservatively, small c, and pay down their debt and spend, and they didn't spend the money in the economy, therefore blowing the forecasts of what the stimulus would do. Is that right?
That's right, and in a sense, that's what happened in the business community as well. That what the data show is that there's an extraordinary amount of uncertainty that is in the economic environment, essentially deriving from the crisis of October, September, the latter part of 2008 and going forward, and that those uncertainties have suppressed long-term capital investment. That is, all sorts of structures,
Right.
which historically in a recovery from a recession led the way. Housing, factory
Right.
buildings, all surged forward. This is the first time in 10 recoveries since the end of World War II that did not happen. It happened very slightly, very marginally, but not much.
So this is bringing forward, we've got a couple of debates that are taking place, I think, that are going to dominate 2014. Number one is this issue of the economic inequality. How much of a crisis do you believe this is?
I think it's quite significant that if you look at the various technical measures that we have of income inequality or wealth inequality,
Right.
they're rising very steadily. They were reasonably stable for a decade or two after the end of World War II, but they've since been moving higher. And the reason for that, as I show in the book, and I look at the data,
Right.
is that there are two segments of the population who receive income. There are those who receive it from wages and salaries and essentially are what we would call either production workers or non-production workers.
Right.
It's a big part of the labor force, obviously. There is a significant part of the society which directly or indirectly get their incomes from the value of assets.
Right.
And if you look at the data, the value of assets have been going up like that. The value of wages and salaries has not.
Does government have to step in here and fix this? Is this going to be, when I say government, it could be the Federal Reserve, could be, but does some sort of governmental entity have to help correct this, force a correction?
I don't think that they can. The basic problem that I see is, for numbers of reasons I discuss in the book, the growth rate of the economy has been very sluggish.
Yeah.
Say 2% a year. It used to be 3.5, 4, and more. And what that has meant is that the income of the average worker has been extraordinarily dampened.
Right.
And the only way to get that changed is to remove this whole aura of uncertainty, which, just to give you an example, corporate investment, as measured by the amount of investment as a share of their cash flow, the money's coming in,
Right.
a year or so ago was at the lowest level since 1938. It's come back a bit, but it is still very suppressed. It's a level of uncertainty and economic suppression, psychological suppression, we really haven't seen since the 30s. And so the question is, what do you do about that?
What is it? Is it government that's causing this? Is it the dysfunction of Washington?
Well, this is where the big political debate is. And I discuss both sides of the debate.
Right.
I think it's mostly government which is acting in a manner which is creating uncertainties, and I think the data do show that. But I'm the first to acknowledge that it's a hypothesis, it's not proved, nor is the other side proved. And this is where the big debate will continue. What I'm reasonably well convinced about is there's no simple government program which is going to change this.
Alan Greenspan, the book is The Map and the Territory, Trying to Make a Better Economic Forecast. You and I trade a lot of maps on politics and political dysfunction, which you deal with also in this book. Some people around here know you as simply Mr. Andrea Mitchell, which we always say. So I always want to say that too. Anyway, it's good to see you.
I'm delighted.
You like to have that title,
I like
don't you?
that title.
All right. Thank you, sir.